The heavy rain, as if it had set out to wash us in its font before the first battle, poured and poured all night. Under our feet the mud squelched disgustingly. At first we tried to avoid it somehow, on the roadsides, but after the first dozen kilometres, having realised the futility of our attempts to somehow keep our feet dry, we went straight along the road, not avoiding the puddles. Our 93rd East Siberian Rifle Division had a combat order to enter the given area by the morning of October 24th, 1941, and, having taken up the defence there, to delay the advance of the enemy advancing along the Malo-Yaroslavets highway to Moscow. The darkness was pitch black. Besides, thousands of boots and hooves, wheels of wagons and guns turned the road into a real mess. It's very hard to walk, slippery. My platoon, perhaps, more difficult than others. On the backs of soldiers, dismantled machine guns of Maxim type. And though their 4 poods are divided for 3 men, the load is still solid. I heard that someone slipped behind me. There was a grunting sound, which was immediately answered by the voice of the loader Bugayenko. "It's not your mother-in-law's flaws. That means that it was Grebenyuk who slipped. I can imagine how difficult it was for him to keep the body of the machine gun on his shoulder. I wonder what he'll say to his friend. You're a fool, you fool. This weather is perfect for camouflage. Grebenyuk and Bugayenko, gunner and loader, are my countrymen. True, they're not from Chernigov, and if we served in Ukraine, we wouldn't be considered fellow countrymen. But in Transbaikalia and even on the Manchurian border, we found out at once that we were almost neighbours. Hundreds of kilometres separating our native places do not count. Distances in the east of the country are cognizable in other dimensions. I remembered a conversation with these fellow countrymen at the firing position of the platoon, located just in the triangle of the borders of the Soviet Union, Mongolia and Manchuria. Here our division at that time was preparing defence in case of invasion of our territory by Japanese samurai. The war was already raging in the west. Anxiously comprehending the latest reports of the Sovinform Bureau, the fighting was already on the outskirts of Kiev. Smolensk had fallen. We continued to improve our defences here with triple energy. That's when Grebenyuk asked, "Comrade Lieutenant, when are we going to try it in action?" And the lieutenant patted his hand on the casing of the machine gun. Pretending not to understand his question, I answered, "In a day or 2 we'll go to Crow's Beam. Shoot." "Tsenete," Grebenyuk stretched out disappointedly. "Pravashistpra, and we are sitting here." "Wiping our pants," muttered Bugayenko, supporting his friend. The mood of the Red Army was clear to me. My native village Luchkovo is also already under the Nazis. What happened to my mother, sisters, nothing is known. But the commander to give in to despondency and even more grouchy cannot. His subordinates are looking at him. "Here's what, my friends," I told them. "What is ordered, that's what you do. There's nothing to quibble about, understand? It seems like a long time ago we had this conversation, and now it was our turn. Ahead are still a few dozen kilometres of march, and there, and then, look, in the morning and the battle. The first real battle in the lives of most of my fighters, and in mine, their commander. And only in my life? True, there are among us and already fired on Khalkhin Gol, on the Mannerheim line. But there are few such commanders, mostly those who are older in rank. The rest are like me, who haven't smelled gunpowder yet. They know about the war only from books and movies. What about movies? It's all very dashing, and our men usually win. It's like a play-by-play. Checkers on the head, machine guns to battle, hurrah, victory. And we are so used to it that now we can't get it into our heads that the enemy is already at the walls of Moscow, and we are kneading mud in the pouring rain, going not to attack, but to defend. Such thoughts, interrupted by commands, "keep up and pull up," were probably not only in my head, although, to be honest, no one was discouraged. It is hard to explain why, maybe because of ignorance of the general state of affairs, or maybe because of our great Soviet optimism. But all soldiers and commanders were sure that it was us who were missing here to stop the enemy. to knock off his invincibility, to drive him back. 45-kilometre march is behind us. It became known that our division was included in the 43rd Army and was tasked to occupy the defence line along the Kamenka, Bogorodskoye, Gorki. And we will not just defend. The commander of the army, Major General K.D. Golubev, it is said, decided to make a counter-attack on the enemy with the forces of our division with the involvement of parts of the other two, weakened by the previous battles of compounds along the Maloyaroslavets highway, to defeat the Hitlerite grouping that broke through the Nara River and restore the defence along its eastern bank. And so it came to pass. Our 129th Infantry Regiment, by decision of the Commander Major General K.M. Erastov, was advancing in the second echelon, being in readiness to develop the success of the first echelon units. For 2 days the division fought a fierce battle. On the second day of the offensive, in the morning, was introduced into the battle and our regiment. But not all. The 1st Battalion, that is, ours, continued to remain in reserve commander. During these 2 days, our units moved forward by 8 kilometres, thoroughly shattered the 91st Motorised Division of the enemy, which was part of the 4th Tank Group of the enemy. About 20 fascist tanks were hit, up to 1,500 enemy soldiers and officers were killed, more than 100 prisoners were captured. But we also suffered considerable losses, especially a lot of commanders were out of action. And still we could not throw the enemy back for Nara. There were still a few kilometres to the river. And so, early in the morning of the 3rd day of fighting, the commander, Captain D.F. Kletnov, gathered all the command staff of the battalion and said, "Received an order to help the regiment. In an hour we go. All to be reinforced with dry rations." In exactly 1 hour the battalion moved forward. Captain Kletnov, calling companies in the head of the column, set the task on the move. Returning from the commander, our company commander, Senior Lieutenant A.E. Novozhilov, began to grumble. It turned out that neither he nor the commander knew anything about the enemy, what to do, too, just ordered to move on the left flank of the battalion. We reached the edge of the forest. Novozhilov, once again swearing, said out loud, not addressing anyone, however, "Is it here to attack? Lieutenant E, I. Ilarionov and I were surprised. Ilarionov looked at each other in surprise. And there was a reason for it. After all, on any field trips we were first explained the situation, but here, how can you set a task without seeing either the terrain or the enemy? How can you attack without artillery support? Do you see that straw stack on the heights? Novozhilov asked us, platoon members. And continued, he, the centre of the company's offensive. Guide, the 2nd platoon. On the right, the 2nd company. No neighbours on the left. Machine gun platoon. 1 machine gun to support the 2nd, the other, the 3rd platoon. You are responsible. The senior lieutenant for the first time addressed me on you. For the left flank, it is open. Got it? Meanwhile, a fierce battle was raging ahead. The bursts of enemy shells and mines covered the heights where, as we soon learned, the units of the 2nd and 3rd battalions were entrenched. And the Nazi artillery was answered by rare shots of only 1-hour battery, whose firing positions were located to our right, on the edge of a birch grove. Very soon the rumble of airplanes was heard in the sky. It was growing, and in a few minutes from behind the forest, 9 Junkers, enemy dive bombers. It passed low over the fighting order of our battalion, already prepared for the attack, made a U-turn, reorganising. And now the leading Junkers went into a dive and dropped bombs. He was followed by the 2nd plane, then the 3rd, 4th. When the last of the 9 spiked on the target, the leader, who had time to gain altitude and make a U-turn, attached to his tail. Thus a peculiar wheel was formed, which our Red Army immediately dubbed Dam. The fascist pilots made 3 runs. During the first one they dropped bombs, in the second one, having switched on sirens, threw rails, weights, barrels and other metal objects onto the positions of the regiment's battalions, which, by the way, emitted in flight nerve-wracking, howling sounds. and in the third one they fired at us from machine guns. As soon as the first group of airplanes, having done their job, flew away, a second 9 appeared over the battlefield. It bombed exactly the same as the first, and with complete impunity. After the air raid again hit the enemy artillery. Then, from behind the distant heights, crawled Nazi tanks and armoured personnel carriers with infantry. Even according to preliminary calculations, on 2 battalions of our regiment, weakened in the fighting, attacked about 30 tanks and up to 2 regiments of motorised infantry. And suddenly, at first, somewhere to our right behind the forest, something burst, howled. One, another, a third. And now fiery comets flew towards the enemy. Katyushas! Their shells struck just on that girder where fascist tanks and motorised infantry had just drawn in. Everything there immediately sank in fire and smoke. You should have seen the mess they made there. Even tanks were toppled over by explosions. Lieutenant B.N. Tkachenko, a classmate of mine at the school, told me in the evening, glowing with joy. But that's in the evening. And while the battle did not subside, the enemy artillery also intensified its fire. Its shells soon began to lie on the edge of the forest, where our battalion prepared for a counterattack. To all appearances, on the right flank of the regiment it was generally well. The Hitlerite attack was repulsed. But in the centre, and especially on the left flank, here up to a dozen Nazi tanks and no less than a battalion of infantry, having passed over the crest of heights, began to move in the direction of our first company. The enemy's plan was not so difficult to figure out. Tanks and motorized infantry broke through to the rear of the regiment, then a simultaneous attack from there and from the front to crush it. True, making this manoeuvre, the fascists did not take into account that they put their right flank under the attack of our battalion. I would like to hit them now. I expressed my wish to Senior Lieutenant Novozhilov, who was lying next to me in the bomb crater. I can see for myself that the moment is right, he replied and picked up the telephone. Yes, I understand. I could hear from the receiver, even to me, the rasping baritone of the commander. Get ready, we'll start now. The Katyusha salvo is the signal of attack. At this time on the distant heights appeared and began to deploy in the pre-battle order up to 2 more battalions of Hitler's motorized infantry. I pointed them to Novozhilov. The second echelon, he said quietly. So, 2 of our battalions against a whole motorized division of the enemy. How does it feel? While Novozhilov was clarifying the task to the platoon commanders, our artillery made a firing raid on the enemy who had cut into the regiment's defence. 45mm anti-tank guns were hitting with special sharpness. From their shells, almost immediately, 2 German tanks caught fire, then some more, and in a few minutes, Katyusha shells hissed. Their bursts accurately covered the slopes of distant heights facing us, on which the battalions of the second echelon of the enemy division flowed. The first volley was followed by another, and immediately a frame appeared above the forest, from where the Katyushas were striking. Having spun around, it flew away, and a few minutes later the enemy's long-range artillery opened a hurricane fire on the forest, but too late. The Katyushas were no longer there. These minutes were enough for them to withdraw from their positions and go to another area. But we knew that the Katyushas were still somewhere nearby and would still fire at the enemy, and this salvo would serve as a signal for our attack. We knew it, but when again there was the sound of rocket shells and fiery comets flew over our heads, many of us shuddered. You bet. After all, this time the Katyusha battery had chosen a firing position right behind our battalion. So, the signal. And no sooner had the columns of smoke and flame raised by the volley settled down in the air than the long-drawn-out signal was heard over the battalion. Attack! Forward! The companies rose in unison, rushed forward, intending to strike a blow in the flank of the enemy group that had broken through. The rolling, endless hurrah drowned out even the bursts of shells and mines. I could see how the fascist infantry stopped for a moment, trampled on the spot, and began to roll back. The enemy tanks also slowed down, and that's exactly what our anti-tankers needed. They opened a rapid fire on the enemy vehicles, at least 2 guns fired at each tank, and it yielded results. First 2, then another armoured vehicles burst into flames. The rest, shooting back, began to retreat until they were hidden behind the heights. I remembered the company commander's order to be especially vigilant to watch the left flank. After all, chasing the fleeing enemy, we also put ourselves under fire of the second echelon of the enemy. But I realised it only after Hitlerites opened a dense rifle and machine gun fire on the left flank of the 3rd Company, which immediately lay down. Having ordered Grebenyuk to engage in a firing duel with the enemy machine guns, I quickly crawled to the 2nd calculation, intending to move it closer to the left flank. And already from there, concentrated fire of the whole platoon to hit the 2nd echelon of Hitlerites. Captain Kletnov noticed the flank fire of the Nazi machine guns, which hindered the advance of our battalion, from his observation point. On his call, these targets were immediately covered by our artillery. Senior Lieutenant Novozhilov also took advantage of the artillery, men's accurate fire. Jumping up, he straightened to his full height and commanded, "Company, in the attack, after me, hurrah!" The soldiers rushed after their commander, and a few minutes later, having passed the crest of the height, joined on its back slopes with the units of the 3rd Battalion. And I, having dragged the 2nd machine gun to the left flank of the company, almost immediately saw that no less than 2 companies of enemy infantry are accumulating in the shrubbery on the left. Strike them at once, otherwise they will attack the company from the rear, flashed in my head. Yes, the fascists are preparing to attack. Here they have already risen, rushed forward. From us to them 400 metres, no more. They are running at full height, firing at the same time. Grebenyuk's machine gun was the first to fire. He struck accurately, precisely. You can see how the Hitlerites fell down, how they trembled on the right flank. "Machine gun to the battle!" I commanded the 2nd calculation. It is necessary as quickly as possible to open fire and him to help Grebenyuk. But the gunner Grishanov, something again does not go well. After a short burst, his machine gun is silent. "What's the matter, Grishanov?" I shouted to the gunner. He, becoming whiter than chalk, is trying to reload the machine gun. It doesn't work. And then I, pushing him away from the machine gun, trying to eliminate the delay. But the reloading handle won't move. I open the lid of the box, take out the receiver. That's it. The cartridge is skewered in the chamber. I take the ribbon out of the receiver, throw it to the loader to make the cartridge aligned in it. I take out the lock, remove the fired cartridge case from it, and put it back in place. I insert the receiver, close the lid of the box, and shout, "Tape!" No tape. Looking around, I see the loader Savin, who somehow strangely dropped his head on his hands. And what's this? A trickle of blood drips from his forehead on the sleeve of his uniform. Killed? Grishanov. I'm yelling to the gunner now. You'll be the loader. He, carefully pushing away Savin's body, lies down in his place and quickly gives me the tape. In the sight it seems that the grey-green overcoats are very close. Hitlerites are running straight to the machine gun, something cackling, but they are not firing. Apparently they think to capture us alive. But the first long turn with independent dispersion of bullets along the front, as we were taught in the school, breaks their hopes. Second turn. And the enemy chain trembled, the galloping stopped, the fascists mowed down by bullets fell down. I give one more turn into their thickest part. On the left, Grebenyuk's machine gun continues to beat in short bursts. Apparently he has already repulsed the attack and now shoots some targets. And in front of me, the German unit is mounting its Maschinengewehr on a tripod. One, another short bursts, and, "Here you are, you fascist bastard," bursts out of me when I see that the enemy's squad is collapsing at his machine gun, looking for the next target. Hitler's infantry is hastily entrenching itself, simultaneously firing at our machine gun nests. A Nazi officer appears in the sight. He kneels down and waves his hand, signalling his soldiers to withdraw. I press the trigger, but for some reason there are no shots. I see an empty tape lying to the left of the machine gun. "Ribbon!" I turn to Grishanov. He is shouting something. Strange, I hear his voice, but I can't understand the words. And then the gunner points his finger at the machine gun. Got it? The tape is in the receiver. I reload the machine gun, looking for the German officer, but he's gone, as well as the infantry lying low. Where are the Hitlerites, Grishanov? They have withdrawn, Drapalu-Valu, shouts smiling gunner. Now we can at least a little breather. A German shell flew low, almost overhead, whistling through the air. It exploded 100 meters behind. The second, at about the same distance, but only in front. They've got us in a fork. We have to change the firing position. But where to? Back in the school we were taught that in case of being caught in an artillery fork we should get out of it by throwing forward. But how can we do it now, when the fascists are ahead, even though they're rolling back? And our infantry is not there. The company has already left to the right. The machine gun platoon was ordered to cover the left flank of the battalion. So we have to stay here, just change position to the left, closer to Grebenyuk's machine gun, behind that yellowed shrubbery. I command, Grishanov, on the rollers, quickly. The gunner, together with the ammunition carrier Karamayev, who replaced the killed Savin, grab the machine gun by the arcs, pick up the boxes from under the ribbons, and, ducking, run after me. Our defection was noticed by the Hitlerites, who were now entrenched about 500 meters away. They opened fire from machine guns and automatic weapons. A small ravine hid us. While we were changing the firing position, the fascists came to their senses and resumed the attack. Grebenyuk's machine gun met them with long bursts. Grebenyuk is alive. Grishanov smiled happily. There he is, shooting. But Grebenyuk's machine gun, after a few bursts, suddenly became silent. Hitlerites were approaching. Grishanov, behind the machine gun, I commanded the crew. Karamayev, loaders, and I, to Grebenyuk. I crawled. Ahead, a stack of rye straw. Somewhere near it must be Grebenyuk's firing position. Climbing from the backside of the stack, I looked around. Grebenyuk's machine gun is nowhere to be seen. Where is he? I was spotted. Several mines landed near the stack. I went down to the ground. At that time, the enemy infantry again, for the umpteenth time, attacked again. Grishanov's machine gun started to work on the right. I could see how Hitlerites were falling, and the survivors were falling to the ground, rolling on it, looking for shelter. What? Do not like it. I thought gloatingly about the enemy machine gunners. Do you crouch to the ground? And before they were walking at full height. It's all right. We'll beat the hell out of you. But what is it? On the risen, already thinned out fascist chain hit a long machine gun burst from the left. Grishanov? But he's on the right. Then, Grebenyuk? That's right, him. There's where he climbed. The machine gun was beating from the edge of the birch grove, which was about 1 kilometre away from me. Well, it's a good position. Dagger fire, devastating, along the right flank of the attacking enemy chain. At the same time, Grebenyuk's position is hidden from enemy observers. Well, Grebenyuk, well done. So, everything is in order. Do there, I think, nothing to do there. Now back to Grishanov. While I'm crawling back, both machine guns are firing at the retreating fascists. Withstood, brothers, I shout, crawling to Grishanov. All alive? Alive? He cheerfully responds. Meanwhile, the sun is already setting behind the horizon. The battle is fading throughout the defence of the regiment. I'm writing a report to the company commander. We inflicted significant losses on the enemy. There are about 100 corpses of enemy soldiers and officers lying in front of the firing positions of the platoon. I also wrote about my losses, about ammunition consumption, asked to replenish them, to feed the platoon. He sent a Red Army soldier, Karamayev, with the report. "Don't fall into the clutches of the fascists," I admonished the soldier. "No, they won't," answered Karamayev. "I'll give them the axe to the head myself. He is a Buryat by nationality. Before the war, he was an excellent hunter, a good shot. I already see him as a machine gunner. As for his poor knowledge of the Russian language, it is a correctable matter. Running a little ahead, I will say, it will be so. When in one of the battles wounded Grishanov, Karamayev will replace him and become an excellent gunner. Yes, the battle has quieted down, but worries from this has not increased. It is necessary to foresee everything to repel a new attack of the enemy at any moment. I put forward Grishanov's machine gun, ordering the calculation to dig a trench with a full profile. And I find Grebenyuk's calculation on the edge of the same grove from where he repulsed the last Hitlerite attack. Ephraitor himself is easily wounded in the leg. The rest of the men are unharmed. I inform them that Savin was killed. This news upset everyone. After all, in the minds of soldiers, still does not fit that in the war and good people die. All the more that Savin with his Oki Volga talk was loved in the platoon for his imperturbability and cleverness. Grebenyuk in Transbaikalia asked him to be the second number in his calculation, but then it was decided to pair him with a fellow countryman with Grishanov. And now Grebenyuk remembered about it. "You didn't give me Savin, Comrade Lieutenant," he says thoughtfully, lying under a bush. "If he had been with me, I might have survived." "In war, no one is guaranteed to stay alive," I replied. "And you were wounded. It could have killed you." "It won't," the sergeant said angrily. "I'll be glad. But let's finish talking about it. How much ammo do you have left?" "Half a ribbon. Grishanov has no more than that." "What to do? Where's the company sergeant major? We must find him by morning at all costs. In the morning the fascists will come again. Comrades," I turn to the squad, "we must find the petty officer, bring ammunition and dinner." "Hell knows where to look for him," Grebenyuk answered angrily again. "Yes, I know that the company petty officer is disliked by both soldiers and junior commanders, and we, platoon too. He behaves arrogantly, rude, shouts at everyone, especially in the presence of the commander or political officer of the company, serves himself. By the way, he wears company uniforms, although he is not supposed to. One wonders where the company commander is looking. But now the petty officer is absent for some reason. But it's not us who have to look for him. It's him who has to look for us. To find out what we need, to try to provide everything we need. But no, he's hiding somewhere in the rear. We must put an end to this. I'll talk to the company commander if I have a chance. But that's on occasion. In the meantime, we need to find a petty officer. The platoon can't fight without ammunition, and I'm hungry. I'm asking the men. Who will go in search of the petty officer? "Me," says the ammunition carrier. "But where to look for him, Comrade Lieutenant?" "In the woods behind us. The Red Army soldier leaves. Meanwhile, we decide to move Grebenyuk's machine gun closer to Grishanov's position. As already mentioned, Grebenyuk is lightly wounded in the leg. He steps on it with difficulty, but he refuses to go to the infirmary flatly. I, Comrade Lieutenant, want to take revenge on the fascists for Savin. In today's battle you've already taken revenge. How many of them were killed by your machine gun fire?" "I didn't count, Comrade Lieutenant. 12 or 4, no less." "You see, you can't joke with a wound. And yet Savin is worth more, Comrade Lieutenant." Grebenyuk turns away. I realise there's no point in insisting on my own now, and frankly speaking, I'm sorry to part with the lieutenant. By this time Karamayev returns, reports that he has not found the company commander, and gave the report to the political officer. He reports other news. The commander of the 2nd Platoon, Lieutenant V.I. Muryazev, was killed. The company political officer I.I. Ivanov intends to bring his men here, to us. "And the company commander is alive?" I ask Karamayev. "Even the political officer doesn't know about it yet," the Red Army man answers. The news that a rifle platoon will arrive here and take up the defence pleased me. But the death of Vasya Mryazev saddened me. I knew him very well. He and I arrived at the regiment almost at the same time. I was from Tomsk, or rather from Belotserkovsky Machine-Gun School, transferred shortly before the war to Tomsk, and he was from Kemerovo Infantry School. They became friends very quickly. Vasily was a well-read, highly cultured man, an intelligent commander and a reliable comrade. I liked in him and his masculine constancy. I knew that his favourite girl is studying at the Institute in Kuzbas, and after defending their diplomas, they intend to get married. And Mryazev lived waiting for this hour, now and then took out a photo of his chosen one and, showing it to me, for the umpteenth time told me how good she was, how they would live happily together. Alas, the war had its own way, very cruel. And how many more human destinies will it maim? That's what I thought that evening. And the thick autumn twilight was already descending on the land near Moscow. Where there was the enemy, rockets were flying up into the sky every now and then. This Hitlerites illuminated the area in front of their front line. And far away, in their rear, a red glow was blazing in half the sky. Somewhere artillery duel was still rumbling here and there, as if warning that the calculations are not asleep. Awake, machine guns crackled. The Polytruk and his platoon did not appear. Thinking about it, I sent Karamaev to him again. About an hour later he came back, and not alone. There were only 13 men left in the second platoon. There were also seriously wounded Red Army soldiers. For some reason they also brought them with them, having built makeshift stretchers from rifles and cloak tents. 3 lightly wounded came by themselves. Ivan Ivanovich sank down heavily on a pile of straw, which my soldiers took from a nearby stack, and began to tell. I went into the attack with the second platoon. Strong flank fire of the enemy almost immediately put us on the ground. Artillery suppressed enemy machine guns. We rose again. In front, dragging the soldiers behind him, went Lieutenant Mryazev. He was the first to be hit by an enemy bullet. One of the Red Army men shouted, "Lieutenant killed!" and the men stumbled in indecision. I had to lead the platoon. We broke into the fascist trenches. The Nazis began to retreat. They couldn't stand our hand-to-hand fighting. Well, and then... Somehow it happened that our fighting orders got mixed up. The units of the 3rd Battalion got mixed up. By the time we sorted it out, time was gone. "And you here, on the left flank too, of course it was hot," continued the political officer. "We saw how up to 2 companies of Hitlerites, having crushed the left flank company of the 3rd Battalion, rushed to the rear of the regiment, and then, as if running into some wall, lay down. And no matter how much they tried to advance, nothing worked. We wondered who was fighting so well. Then we heard the crackle of Maxims. So it was you?" "We were," I confirmed. "We repulsed several attacks, didn't let the bastards break through to the rear of the regiment. We killed a lot of bastards. True, we had losses. 1 man was killed, another easily wounded." "Who?" asked the Polytruk. "Loader Savin was killed. Gunner Grebenyuk was wounded." "Ah, Grebenyuk," nodded Ivan Ivanovich. "I know him. A good machine gunner." "All the men of the platoon deserve praise," I prompted. "But I'm worried about something else. Ammunition is bad, Comrade Polytruk. We have half a ribbon left per machine gun. Besides, the men are hungry and the petty officer is still missing. And we don't even know where to look for him." "Look for him. And don't just take care of your platoon. Take command of these riflemen, take over the defence and command. Did you send someone for the petty officer?" "I did. But that's not the point, comrade political officer. The petty officer should be looking for us, not us looking for him." I know, I'll take care of it. Having made a list of the 2nd platoon, I made a combat calculation. There were only 2 junior commanders left alive in the platoon. I decided to divide the men into 2 squads, each with 6 men. 1 Red Army soldier was assigned to Grishanov's calculation as a cartridge carrier, instead of Savin. ordered the squads to entrench. He went back to the political officer. He was sitting in the same place and, having taken off his boots, was rubbing his swollen wounded in the Civil War legs with his hands. Ivan Ivanovich, I called the political officer by name and patronymic for the first time. Did you bring the 2nd platoon here on your own initiative, or who ordered you to do so? Ivanov, after thinking about something for a second, answered, I met in the 3rd Battalion regimental commander, Captain Sedik. He, by the way, very worried about the left flank. That's why he ordered me to take these riflemen and together with your machine gunners to cover it. He told me to hold on until I send a replacement. Yes, it was hard for Cedric today, I put in. The regiment was fighting without 1 battalion. It's good that we arrived in time. Otherwise, the regiment would not have been able to hold on. We were in time. The political officer snorted for some reason, and immediately explained, I'll tell you a secret. Kletnov brought our battalion here unauthorized, without the permission of the division commander. Now Sedik is afraid that both Kletnov and him will get the worst of it. Maybe the commander himself would have led the battalion into battle in this direction, but order is order. Arbitrariness in battle is a crime. Even though there's a saying that you can't judge the winners, but I don't know how things will turn out in reality. By the way, and I want to give you advice, continued after a pause Ivan Ivanovich, do not always look at events only from your own bell tower. Look deeper. Today you gave the fascists a thrashing. Do you think they will calm down? No way. Last night our scouts captured a lieutenant. This fascist was from the 4th Tank Group. Well, Sedik reported it to the commander. He also expressed his concern. Tomorrow, that is today, the regiment will be hot, the whole fascist division will peel up on it. And what about the commander? I asked. Imagine, even rejoiced, thanked Sedik for good information. Now we have found her, he said. Found who? The 4th Tank Group. They're looking for it. And here it is, right in front of us. And today it was just flowers. Tomorrow you'll see the berries will be ripe. We'll survive, I assured the political officer, not quite confidently, and immediately tried to bring him back to the subject of Kletnov's AWOL. So how did our battalion end up here? Just like that. Sedik asked him yesterday, but the commander replied, No, I won't give you my reserve. This battalion is the only one I've got left. Do you know what defence line our division occupies? That's it. So you'll have to make do with the available forces. And Sedik? What about Sedik? He's also, to some extent, to blame for Kletnov's AWOL. But he's understandable. After all, only 2 battalions against a motorised division of the enemy. How can you stand there? So he decided to call Kletnov and tell him about the situation. He was being sly, of course, and Kletnov, after listening, only asked, Where? Sedik called him on the phone and named him the point where the regiment's weakness was the greatest. It seemed to be just a simple name for information. And Kletnov, what should we do now? What? Ivan Ivanovich spat annoyingly and said, The battalion must be withdrawn from the battle immediately. That's what. The commander is probably furious already. We'll all have a bath. The polytruk began to pull on his wet boots. Standing in front of him, I was thinking. I was thinking about our commander's action. That he's wrong, it's undeniable. AWOL is unacceptable in war. Maybe our battalion was more needed in the other direction, where the other 2 regiments of the division were fighting today. And at the same time, we didn't let the Nazis through here, we beat them back. What if it would be an excuse for Kletnov? My thoughts were interrupted by a loud shout. Stop! Who's coming? They're their own. We're looking for a machine gun platoon. Accompanied by Karamayev, a Red Army man came to us, breathing heavily. The polytruk recognized him at once. Is that you, Ryabov? I am, Comrade Polytruk. The company commander sent me. He ordered all those who are here with you to dismount immediately and go to him. Here it comes. What are we going to do? Quietly asked me Polytruk. How what? The last order, of course, to fulfill, I replied. That's all right, the polytruck thoughtfully stretched out, and immediately asked. And the flank? Leave the flank of the regiment uncovered? After all, Captain Sedic ordered not to leave the line until the arrival of the shift. What to do then? And here's what, Ivan Ivanovich said decisively. We can't leave the regiment's flank open, so listen to my order now. Stay with the men here, wait for the shift, and then join the company. I'll settle this matter with Senior Lieutenant Novozhilov personally. Understood, Comrade Political Officer. Ivan Ivanovich and the contact left, and then only I remembered about Red Army soldier Savin. I asked Grebenyuk if the grave was ready. It is ready, Comrade Lieutenant, he answered. Here it is, not far away, about 30 paces under a birch tree. The place is conspicuous. Leaving one man at the machine guns, I assembled the platoon, built it in front of the dug grave. The soldiers covered its bottom with pine branches. Here, next to it, there was a pile of chopped lapnik. They decided to cover the body of the dead Savin. Standing on the right flank of the platoon, half-voiced commanded, Attention, Red Army men Grishanov, Ivanov and Seleznev out of the line. The named soldiers came out, stood near Savin's body. Red Army soldiers, Gromov and Shumeko, load. The bolts of rifles clicked, and I said briefly, Goodbye, our battle comrade. We'll avenge you on the fascists. A threefold rifle salute cracked softly. Several more hours passed. Neither the petty officer nor the Red Army soldier who had gone to look for him was still missing. No news from the political officer either. It was drizzling rain. I felt tired and had a headache. I decided to lie down under a bush on an unfolded cloak tent. I just closed my eyes and immediately remembered the pictures of today's battle. I don't know how long I lay in such a half-awake state. I was raised on my feet by the intensified artillery cannonade. Hitlerites were firing on areas, striking then on the front edge, then on the depth of our defence. A few shells flew, and to us. Fortunately, nobody was hit. On the right and a little ahead, choking, the enemy's machine guns rumbled. They were immediately echoed by machine guns, and rockets flashed in the sky in frightened flashes. Why should that be? After all, the Germans do not fight at night. Did they notice anything suspicious? Or are they shooting just for fun? The Nazis get nervous at night too. I heard some noise behind me. I listened. Yes, someone is coming towards us. A sapper spade clinked against something. There was a muffled Russian conversation, stomping of feet. Who are they? I asked them in a low voice. The shift, answered a surprisingly familiar voice. Zhora, you? I didn't believe it. He is, answered Kuznetsov's hoarse voice. Junior Lieutenant G.I. Kuznetsov has been commanding a machine gun platoon in the 7th Rifle Company of the 3rd Battalion for more than 2 years. We met him at the competition of machine gun platoons back in Chita. He was married and lived with his family in a private apartment. I remember one day Kuznetsov asked me to lend him until the receipt of rubles 30. You see, he explained, embarrassed, my wife bought something for the household, this and that. In short, I shall not reach the day of the infantry. Since that borrowed $30, our relations had become so trusting. And now this Zhora is standing in front of me, tired, with a hoarse voice. So he's alive and unharmed? I burst out. As you can see, he wheezed and immediately complained. It was hell yesterday, not a minute's respite. Your battalion and the Katyushas helped us out a lot. Did you see their work? Only shreds from the fascists were flying, and they still come. Listen. He suddenly changed the topic of conversation and turned to me. Why was your battalion taken out of the battle? Without it, we'll be in trouble. The bosses know better. I evaded a direct answer, and in turn I asked, and where did our battalion went? Do you know? Over there somewhere. Kuznetsov waved his hand vaguely to the rear. Well then, we must hurry to catch up with him. Come on, take my possessions as soon as possible. How many men you got? 16 with me. plus 1 Maxim and a Degtyar. That's what Kuznetsov called the Degtyarev handgun. Not much. Well, shall we begin? I called the squad leaders, and they led Kuznetsov's men to their positions. And how many machine guns do you have? Asked Jora. 2 Maxim and 1 handheld, and we had a direct hit from a mine in the second one. The whole crew was killed, and the Maxim was turned into scrap metal. It was dawning in the east. My combined platoon is ready to move. But where to go? Where to find the battalion? The liaison, whom the political officer promised to send, hasn't arrived yet. I do not know where to go, I admitted to Kuznetsov. Go straight to the regiment commander, advised the latter. His command post over there at that height. Kuznetsov showed the direction. I'll give you a fighter. He will guide you. We followed the guide. The command post of the regiment was equipped hastily. Just a few open slits. And in one of these slits, covered from above with only a cloak tent, was Captain Sedik. He now has battalion commanders, told me a sentry standing at the entrance. I pushed aside a corner of the tent and squeezed into the gap. I looked around. The regimental commander was squatting, holding an unfolded map in his lap. The chief of staff, bending over, was shining a pocket flashlight at him. On the right and left, also squatting and also with maps, sat the commanders of the 2nd and 3rd battalions. Is the task clear, comrades? I heard the voice of Sedik. I repeat, burrow as deep into the ground as possible. Not a step back, that's the order. Yesterday we held the occupied line, we need to stand today. Now take your places. When the battalion commanders separated, I reported to the captain that I gave up my position, but where to look for my battalion now, I do not know. Captain Yar. I. Sedik got up, stepped towards me. He took my hands above the elbows, shook them and asked, So it was you who covered the left flank of the regiment? Well, well done. You held on yesterday. It was hard, very hard, wasn't it? True. Today won't be easy either. The fascists will come with no less force. And if yesterday they tried to break through our defence from the start, today they will look for a weak spot in it. But nothing. We'll stand. After all, and the regiment is not the same, smelled, as they say, powder. Sedik was silent, thought about it, apparently calculating something in his mind, then took the map from the hands of the chief of staff, asked to light it with a flashlight, and, addressing me, he said, Where is your battalion, you ask? Today he will have a more difficult task than he solved yesterday. Give me your map. See the old Warsaw Highway? Right there. And he jabbed his finger at the map, showing a bold line drawn in blue pencil with an appendix to the east. Draw that ledge for yourself. Yesterday up to a motorised regiment of fascists with tanks broke through along the highway at the junction between our 266th Infantry Regiment and the neighbouring division. Your battalion should concentrate here. Captain Sedik drew a red pencil on my map a circle in the forest, which is about 10 to 12 kilometres west of the village of Kresty. Remember, we passed this village when we were going to the front. Hitlerites, however, did not reach it. They stopped them. And now the army commander is collecting everything he can get his hands on and sending it here. You and your platoon should be there too. Understood? Extending his hand in farewell, the regimental commander once again thanked me for yesterday's battle and let me go. I got out of the gap without asking Sedik the question that had been tormenting me all the time. What about our commander? Did he get hit hard for yesterday's AWOL? How did it turn out? When I approached the platoon, the personnel, except Grebenyuk, was sound asleep. Seeing me, the sergeant got up from his tent and wanted to wake up the men. I signalled him to wait. It had been 24 hours since the men had eaten almost nothing, and it was still unknown when they would get to the kitchen, so let them sleep at least an extra minute. But we must hurry. It's still 2 hours' walk to the battalion, and through the forest. The sunrise was crimson. The day promised to be fine. The artillery cannonade rumbled on the right, and on the regiment's section there was only a rare firefight. The soil in the forest after the long rains was soaked, and mud clods stuck to the boots. It was especially hard for the numbers of the regiments. They carried dismantled machine guns, boxes with ribbons. By the way, there were only 3 men left in each squad. At the halt, I asked the shooters who of them wanted to become a machine gunner. There was no one willing. After all, they had all seen how the backs of my subordinates bent under the weight of the machines, how the gunners shifted the bodies of machine guns from one strained shoulder to another, and the loaders were laden with 4 or 5 boxes, though now empty. What would it be like for them to stuff the belts with cartridges? I just had to order 2 young and sturdy men to carry the looms, alternating with my men. "If you like it," I joked, "I'll enroll you in the machine gun platoon for all kinds of allowances." These words of mine were met with no apparent pleasure. After 2.5 hours, we still approached the area of concentration of our battalion, and just in time. It was already organised in a marching column. The 3rd Company was closing the battalion formation. The commander and political officer were not there. When I asked where they were, Lieutenant Illarionov replied, "At the battalion commander's. They were given a task." And immediately asked, "Do you know Vasya?" I nodded my head silently. "We thought that we would never see you again. As you can see, you're safe." And immediately I turned to the question that was worrying me. "Where is the kitchen? Where is the petty officer? The men are hungry, there's no ammunition." And then, just behind me, I heard a loud voice of the company commander. "Who hasn't had breakfast yet? Go to the kitchen." The foreman was walking along the company line. He was walking in an unbuttoned overcoat, knocked his cap on the back of his head. When he saw me and Illarionov, he came toward us. "Why doesn't your platoon lieutenant go to breakfast? The cooks might even spill the soup out of the cauldrons." "Not lieutenant, but comrade lieutenant," I sharply interrupted him. "Understand?" "Well, let it be." "Comrade lieutenant, so what?" Shrugged his shoulders. "In 15 minutes, comrade petty officer, feed my men and give them ammunition." "Do you hear? I'm timing you," I ordered, still in a raised tone, and took out my watch. The petty officer mumbled something and turned away from me. "If you don't obey the order, you'll go as number 2 to the machine gun," I couldn't help shouting, "and I am not your subordinate. Why are you yelling at me in front of everyone? Tried to go on the attack himself." "Stop talking," I repeat once again. "In 15 minutes to feed the 2nd and machine gun platoons and give ammunition," I commanded imperiously. "In addition, clean yourselves up, and stand properly when the lieutenant is talking to you." "With you, comrade lieutenant, I can't joke with you," the petty officer mumbled fearfully, buttoning his overcoat. Immediately he broke away from his seat and ran to my men. Soon came the company commander and political officer. They were very happy to see me. I briefly reported to them about everything and gave the company a list of the 2nd Platoon's combat calculation and my men. "The commander asked about you," said the company commander. "He also need to report on your arrival." He immediately wrote a short note and sent it with a messenger to the battalion commander. A few minutes later, a Red Army soldier returned and reported that Lieutenant Komulo called Captain Kletnov. "Go," Novozilov said. "Yesterday the commander of the 2nd Company, Senior Lieutenant Mitin, was seriously wounded. Here, instead of him, the conversation was about you." Extending his hand, looked intently into my eyes, quietly said, "I wish you good luck." The Politruk hugged me, patted me on the back, said, "Take care of yourself in battle." Yes, that's how it turned out. I was appointed commander of the 2nd Rifle Company. Company, just a name. In reality, there are only 60 men in the ranks. Here they go, tired, even a little downcast. Ahead of the company walks a tall, sturdy-build political officer, N.A. Safronov. Next to him some, average height, junior lieutenant. Having approached Safronov, I salute him, greet him by the hand. "To us?" he asks. "To you." I've just been assigned to replace Mitin. Good. The Polytruk was silent for a moment, and then for some reason specified, Semyon Ivanovich was wounded in the head by a shrapnel. It was a hot day yesterday. See what was left of the company? I nodded my head silently. I asked, familiarize me at least briefly with the company. Who commands the platoons? How many squad leaders are alive? What weapons? On the first platoon, here he is, Junior Lieutenant Yelinsky. Safronov nodded at his companion. Platoon commander for 2 years. The 2nd, 3rd and machine gun platoons are commanded temporarily by junior enlisted commanders. You understand, it's not the average command staff, but yesterday they were shot at, smelled the powder. Of weapons in the company. 1 machine gun, 6 handheld. The rest are rifles. That's all I can say. Calling platoon commanders to the head of the column, I got to know them briefly. I didn't forget to call the petty officer. He was strictly instructed to monitor the timely delivery of ammunition and food to the platoons. Ahead we saw a small clearing, about 200 metres wide, and only we approached it, as bullets whistled over our heads. Fascists, Hitlerites were hitting with bursting bullets. When they hit the branches of trees, they burst with a sharp crack, splashing smaller splinters. And it gave the impression that we were being shot at from all sides. The companies lay down and returned fire on fire, and still it is necessary to knock out as quickly as possible machine gunners of the enemy, who are settled on the opposite side of the clearing. My company is closest to them. So, I'm sending a chain command. We'll fire 2 volleys with all weapons, then move forward. That's what we're doing. The volleys rumble, the soldiers rise and rush across the clearing. On the opposite side of it, we are met with fire from automatic rifles, even 1 machine gun. But the rush of the company can no longer be stopped. Grenades suppressed enemy machine gunners, not accepting close combat, hiding in the woods. Later it turned out that it was only a reconnaissance of the enemy. The main forces of Hitlerites, concentrated in a powerful fist on a narrow section of the front, were preparing in the morning to lead an offensive along the highway to Podolsk. The beginning of the offensive, Aitno. The fascists struck our units and subdivisions, which had not yet had time to consolidate properly from 2 sides, in converging directions, and at first even had success. But not being able to introduce reserves in time to develop the breakthrough, they first stopped and then retreated. In this battle, only our battalion was hit 3 and captured 2 serviceable enemy tanks, more than a dozen guns and vehicles with ammunition, 30 prisoners. But the companies also suffered losses. In my 2nd rifle, for example, there were only 49 men. Of weapons, except for rifles, 1 machine gun and 4 handheld machine guns. After these battles, our division was ordered to temporarily go on the defensive, although the task to knock the enemy from the bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Nara River and remained for here in force. On the night of October 30th, our battalion went on the defensive on the right flank of the 129th Rifle Regiment, and thus of the division, riding the Warsaw Highway. In the very centre of the battalion's combat order, just saddling the highway, my company took up the defence. On the right, up to the bend of the Nara River, the 1st Company was preparing a stronghold on 2 unnamed heights. It was separated from us by a deep gully. On the left, covering a small birch grove, defended the 3rd Company. It was now commanded by Lieutenant Ilarionov, and Senior Lieutenant Novozhilov took the 3rd Rifle Battalion. You defend this strip, 200 metres to the right and the same amount to the left of the highway. The company is assigned a platoon of 45mm guns and a machine gun platoon, said Kletnov, giving me a combat task. For each soldier to have at least 2 anti-tank grenades and 2 bottles with fuel mixture. Dig deep into the ground. The commander of the German tank group yesterday put into battle only 2 motorised divisions. The tank divisions are probably still on their way, so keep that in mind, wait for it. The company began to dig out firing positions and trenches, connecting them with each other, trenches and passages of communication. 2 rifle platoons with a machine gun each took up the defence in front. The 3rd platoon, also with a machine gun, was positioned 300 metres behind, blocking the highway. Next to it, placing on the right and left of the highway on the gun, positioned an anti-tank platoon. It was positioned in such a way that 40-50 can hit the enemy tanks and in front of the front line, and in case they still cut into our defences. Artillerymen prepared reserve firing positions not far from the main ones. From them could hit the enemy tanks and at the junctions with neighbouring companies. I planned, of course, if we had time, to dig a passage from the platoons of the 1st echelon to the rear, to my CP, which is located to the right of the road, and to the positions of the 2nd echelon platoon and anti-tank guns, and to dig these moves from the outer flanks of the platoons, so that in case of an enemy breakthrough at the junction with neighbours, the company, having taken a circular defence, could use them as cut-off positions. This idea was already generated by the experience of previous battles, especially that first day when the enemy broke through tried to get to the rear of our regiment. When the enemy would start his new offensive, we, of course, did not know, but everything spoke for the fact that it would happen in the next few days. Heavy German bomb carriers flew over us now and then to our rear. From early morning till late evening, frames were hanging in the sky in shifts. They searched for and photographed the combat orders of the Soviet troops, approach and concentration of reserves, firing positions of artillery. After each such overflight, frame hurriedly flew back to its place, and after a certain period of time over this or that area of our defence, Junkers built a Ferris wheel. And yet, despite these interferences, the engineering work progressed rapidly. People with understanding and great responsibility to fulfill the order. Everyone knew that there was nowhere to retreat. Moscow was behind them. We should pay tribute to our political staff, which conducted a great explanatory work with people. Political workers on the examples of their own companies and battalions, individual soldiers and commanders who showed heroism and courage in the battles, fostered in the personnel of units steadfastness, readiness for the feat. They instilled in the soldiers that the steadfast fighters, organised units and parts are able not only to stop the Hitlerites' advance, but also to turn them back. And it will be done here on the fields of Moscow Region. And while our company, as well as other units of the regiment, burrowed into the ground, preparing for a new meeting with the enemy. For 2 days were dug, the first trench, the main positions for machine guns, underbrook recesses for hiding men and ammunition. They began to dig the communication lines from this trench to the rear. The platoon of the 2nd echelon also finished equipping both its position and my observation post. The artillerymen also did a good job. The divisional sappers did not fail. In just 2 nights they put in front of the front edge of the battalion's defence solid anti-tank and anti-personnel minefields. Meanwhile, through the front edge of our defences every now and then came out of the encirclement groups of Soviet fighters and commanders. All these people were terribly exhausted, hungry, ragged, often with trophy weapons in their hands. Often they dragged their wounded comrades on their backs. One day at dawn a small group of surrounded artillerymen came out to us. 2 of them were wounded, one in the head and the other in the leg. These artillerymen were commanded by a petty officer. The group was not well armed. Several men had Russian carbines, others had German automatic rifles obtained in fights. When they were brought to me, the petty officer told me, "We are coming from the very border, from near Grodno." At first we retreated as part of our unit. Southeast of Minsk we were surrounded, but we got through. We took away the guns, but soon there was no fuel for tractors. By this time our battery commander, Senior Lieutenant Kozhevnikov, died. Only platoon commander. Lieutenant Krivosheev was left with us. He ordered to blow up the tractors and to take the locks out of the guns, remove the sights and take them with us. So we did it. At Bobruisk the lieutenant died, and I led the group of survivors. We marched, carrying locks and sights in our bags. Near Mogilev, we joined the remnants of one of our units, which was defending this city. We held it for several days. Then we were surrounded again, broke out, and started to fight our way to Smolensk. Our troops just then went on the offensive, knocked out the Nazis from the city. We also took part in those battles, but to hold Smolensk, as you know, it was not possible this time. The fascists had too many airplanes and tanks, but nothing. We will overcome the bastards. During these months, we've already learned a lot. An enlisted petty officer. Tall, sturdy build, he was, apparently, once an unrivalled strongman. And all his comrades were just like him. But only malnutrition had exhausted his strength. And yet, at the end of his story, the petty officer asked me if he and his comrades could stay with us. I reported by phone to the battalion commander. "Send everyone who comes out of there to the rear, that's the order. People are exhausted, they need to rest, come to their senses," answered the commander. "But the artillerymen are ready to fight with us. We really need them." "The order is not discussed, but carried out," muttered into the phone captain. Yes, I was sorry to part with the petty officer and his comrades. In addition, and in the company, I have few people, and 8 fighters who have travelled 1,500 kilometres in combat, more than once looked death in the eye. I would be very useful. But an order is an order. We had to send the artillerymen to the rear. So we continued to improve our defences. And at night we let more and more encircled men through the front line. The difficulty was that in front of our front line, as already mentioned, were solid minefields. And there were cases of blowing up these people on mines. Therefore we had to make passages and put out sappers' guides at them for the night, and at dawn to mine them again. Once at dusk in the rear of the Nazis suddenly broke out a strong firefight. Machine guns were firing, grenades were bursting, flurries were flying up in series. The shooting was increasing and then fading. My men were wary. They asked me what it could mean, but I myself was lost in guesswork. But here grenade bursts and firing seemed to be getting closer, and soon a battle broke out at the front line of the fascists. German artillery rumbled, machine guns and automatic rifles began to speak more angrily. It became clear that some of our part was fighting its way out of the encirclement. I called the battalion commander, reported the situation. "I hear and even see," he replied. "We need to help those who are fighting through. Open passages in minefields. Mark them. Send your fighters to meet them. Meanwhile, I will ask the artillery to hit the Hitlerites." In a few minutes our artillery really worked. Even a battery of Katyusha fired a salvo. Fire of the enemy weakened at once, and in front we heard joyful cries, stomping of boots. Through passages in minefields, people ran to us, hurrying to hide in the trench from German bullets and shells. Many of them were carrying seriously wounded men. Others were helping those who could still move with difficulty. One of the last to jump into the trench was the commander, who introduced himself to me as Major Sviridov. He was followed by 2 soldiers with a wounded man on a trench coat. "Who are you carrying?" I asked. "Senior political officer," answered one of the soldiers. "He has a heavy wound in the chest. He needs urgent dressing." The senior political officer was delirious. He was giving some commands, then mumbled something inaudible. I asked the major if all the men were out. He replied that all of them must have come out because this senior political officer was leading the cover group. Fearing that Hitlerites would not rush after those who came out of the encirclement to our front line, I gave an order to urgently mine the passages in the minefields and to strengthen surveillance. All the personnel of the company ordered to stay at their places at arms until a special order. I invited the major to pass into my slit, covered from above with several cloak tents. And here, in the dim light of a smoker made from the shell casing of a 45mm shell, I examined him. The major's face was dark grey. Gymnasтерka on the right shoulder is torn. In the hole you can see the body covered with caked blood. The right arm from wrist to elbow is bandaged, resting on a belt thrown over the neck. I am the head of the operations department of the 81st Rifle Division, the major introduced himself, then nodded in the direction of the wounded political officer. And he is the commissar of the staff. We took part of the division out of the encirclement. With us, the banner of one of the regiments. As for the people, before the breakthrough with us were 327 people. How many came out, I do not know. The major was silent and looked at the groaning political officer, then continued, I ask you, Comrade Lieutenant, to help all the wounded, and let someone escort me to your regimental commander. At that moment, the company's SAN instructor squeezed through the gap to us. Without saying a word, knelt down, cut with scissors the uniform on the chest of the senior political officer. On the left side, he was bleeding from a large shrapnel wound. At the touch of the bandage to the wound, the polytruk woke up, opened his eyes, groaned. Then he asked, with difficulty unclenching his lips, "Where am I?" The major leaned over, called him by name and patronymic, answered, "At their own. We got out of the encirclement after all." "Good," said the senior political officer with a sigh of relief, and immediately, convulsively threw back his head, stretched out. I reported the major's request to the battalion commander. "Let the liaison bring him to me," said the commander. "Bury the senior political officer, and check if any of the wounded on the neutral strip." Major thanked for his help, and accompanied by a liaison went to the battalion command post. And I, having called to me the commanders of rifle platoons, began to evacuate the wounded from the neutral strip. At that time, the commander of the sapper platoon came to us, who with his men all this time was at the passages and let through them those who came out of the encirclement. He reported that 251 people had passed through the passages. Of these, 44 were seriously wounded. Then he asked if all the passages were mined. I explained to him the situation and ordered to leave one passageway with the duty sappers in front of the 1st and 2nd platoons, and the middle one between them to close. For the evacuation of wounded will be enough, and 2 passages. In the course of the message heard footsteps. Then 2 silhouettes appeared. The sentry shouted, "Who's coming?" was followed by the answer, "Our own," to the company commander. "I'm here to see you, Comrade Lieutenant," said the first one. It was a captain from the district. "There is a request. The commander of the cover group, Senior Lieutenant Murashov, here is his friend." The captain shook his head in the direction of his partner, also a senior lieutenant. "Died literally in front of the wire fence. They couldn't carry his body out. Can't we do it now? Let the senior lieutenant go with your men and show them the place." I gave the appropriate order, and the senior lieutenant left with the men into the night. The captain and I went to my observation post. On the way, I asked him to tell me about everything he had seen on the other side of the front. The captain replied that he even had a map with the situation. He would show it to me, and if necessary, he would give it to the regimental headquarters. However, the situation was mapped on a German map, as they did not have our maps of the Moscow area, so they had to get them from the enemy. "By the way, have you seen the German maps?" the captain asked me. "No. They have some kind of monochrome, not like ours. If you look at ours, you can see at once where there is a forest, where there is a swamp, where there is an elevation. You can quickly determine the steepness of slopes and magnetic declination. But with them, you have to get used to their maps." We approached the observation post. In the dugout, we were met by the company foreman. "Dinner, Comrade Lieutenant," he reported. "I sent it to the platoons in thermoses with messengers, and 100 grams per man." "What do you mean by that?" I asked the petty officer in surprise. "Vodka." "That's right. The regiment commander said that there was an order from above to give 100 grams of vodka daily for each Red Army soldier and commander, to keep people warm. But I want to ask you, Comrade Lieutenant, when is it better to give it out? In the morning or in the evening?" "In the evening, yeoman, in the evening. It's still warm in the daytime, but the nights are already cold." Petty Officer Ershoff was also an enlisted man, and this fall his term would have expired and he would have gone home. But war, Ershoff came from Altai. Like all Siberians, he didn't talk much, but a very warm-hearted man. All the men in the company loved him. Average height, stocky, he sometimes equally with everyone else dug trenches, equipped firing positions. Although he might not have done it, a petty officer has a different range of concerns, and now. I offered the captain dinner. He readily agreed. "I haven't had a crumb in my mouth for 2 days," he said, taking off his trophy automatic rifle from his shoulder. After dinner, the captain took out a crumpled map from under his uniform, spread it out on the table, spread it out with his palms and moved the smoker closer to it. In the dim light, it was not immediately possible to see not only anything from the map data of the situation, but also the map itself. It was difficult to read it. Yes, the captain spoke the truth about German maps, but now my eyes got used to the non-Russian font. The situation drawn by the captain began to emerge. The map was mottled with circles, arrows, signatures made with a poorly sharpened pencil. They told what this or that sign meant, as well as the time of day and dates. Those data about the enemy that interested me, I put on my map. Then I told the captain. All this should be shown to the regimental commander, and for higher headquarters the map is of great value. The captain nodded his head in agreement. At dinner he told me under what conditions their division was surrounded and how they fought their way to their own. And then asked me if I had been fighting for a long time, how strong our defence was. "We have been fighting with a fascist motorised division for 2 days. So far we are holding on," I answered. "And those tank units, which, as you say, are moving to the front, are probably the main forces of the enemy's 4th Tank Group." "That's what it is," stretched out the captain. "So we must soon wait for a real offensive." "Well, hold on, Lieutenant. And I'm off, business," said the captain, shaking my hand in farewell. The next day 38 replenishment men arrived in the company. They were brought by Junior Lieutenant Guzva. Among those who arrived there were 4 sergeants. Safronov and I immediately talked to people, told them about the division, regiment, about the last battles. Most of the replenishment arrived after recovery from hospitals. The others came out of the encirclement. People who'd been shot at. Well, that's very good. Replenishment distributed by platoons. Now the company was already 68 people. And in the morning, a new joy. The chief of artillery of the regiment sent a repaired machine gun. Taking into account the attached in the company now had 4 Maxim. Already a force, Combat Kletnov called and said that he would send me a platoon of anti-tank rifles for reinforcement. I asked what kind of guns. "You'll see when they arrive. The squads are prepared, the guns are good, the armour of Nazi tanks pierce through. Put 2 squads on the front line, and 1 in the second echelon to the right and left of the highway." When the platoon arrived, the political officer and I were interested in the new weapons. The anti-tank guns turned out to be of very simple design and quite easy to handle. "Did you shoot at the tanks?" I asked the lieutenant, the platoon commander. "Not on tanks, but on armour plates, at the firing range. How thick is the armour?" "Any kind of armour," the lieutenant replied. Several more days of languid waiting passed. Hitlerites were silent. Only one of their itinerant guns from different places was firing at the battalion's defence, scattering shells then on the front line, then on the stronghold of the second echelon platoon, then on artillery positions in the depth. To me, then still an inexperienced commander, it all seemed rather strange. In the evening, the battalion commander arrived at the company. After listening to my report on the situation, Captain Kletnov asked, "What was the enemy artillery doing during the day?" "Fired 1 gun on the defence." "How did they do it?" "Well, firing." I shrugged my shoulders and answered, "A shell there, a shell there." Brother, it wasn't just shooting. She was shooting at the reppers in the defence, got it? So the enemy is preparing to attack. Look, be careful. Send ambushes to the neutral strip at night. The fascists must not quietly clear the passages in the minefields in front of you. Keep watch, and it would be good to catch the tongue. Try. Then the commander expressed a desire to go to the first trench and talk to people. I went to see him off. The night was dark, drizzling fine rain. At the bottom of the trenches and trenches already formed puddles. Now and then rockets were flying over the enemy defences, lazily fired machine guns. In the intervals between their queues in the rear of the enemy was heard the rumble of tank engines. Combat stood for a few minutes, listening to this rumble, then talked to a few Red Army men, checked the work of the hand machine gun, which stood on the platform next to it, then said, "In a day or two we must expect an enemy offensive. Get ready." And the next morning I was called to the phone by the regiment commander. "How are you, Comrade Comulo?" he asked. I thoroughly reported to him about the enemy, how I built the defence, thanked him for the anti-tank guns. "Do you have someone to leave for you?" Sedish asked. "There is." The commander of the rifle platoon, Junior Lieutenant Jelinski. "With the company can cope, if he is appointed commander," and, without waiting for an answer, ordered, "Leave him for himself and come to the battalion commander. Here we'll talk." While I, tormented by conjectures, reached the battalion's CP, Sadiq was ahead of me. Saying hello to me by the hand, the captain again listened to my report on the situation, then said, "Here's what, Comrade Komulo. Captain Kletnov was appointed commander of the 51st Regiment instead of Major Kurizin, who fell under the bombing and died. So take the battalion, you'll get the order today." I, not believing, looked at the regiment commander. Blood was pounding in my temples. I knew I had to answer something Sedish, but I could not. Everything was so unexpected. After all, the battalion, not a platoon or even a company. In addition, from day to day, expected enemy offensive. Will I be able to cope with the battalion, hold my position? A whole swarm of contradictory thoughts were rushing around in my head. "I understand. Of course, you did not expect such a thing," Yakov Ilyich continued in the meantime. "Before going to the front, my appointment as regimental commander was like a thunderbolt for me too. But as you can see, I am in command. And now you are?" "Yes, to command a battalion." Putting my hand to my cap, I finally answered. "Well, that's good," seemed even pleased Sedich, and already in a business-like tone said, "The army commander promised to send several tanks to strengthen the defence of the highway. When they arrive, I'll tell you where to put them and how to use them. That's it. Well, and you, my friend?" He turned to Captain Kletnov. "I wish you good luck. Be well. It's a pity to part, but what can we do?" At parting, the captains hugged each other tightly. Then Kletnov came to me, extended his right hand and patted me on the shoulder with his left. "I hope for you, Komulo. I'm sure you'll justify your trust." I led them both to the message passage leading to the rear. At the turn of the facade, Sedic stopped, looked around the battalion defence area, and then, turning to me, said, "Today you should definitely visit the 1st and 3rd companies. Get acquainted there with the commanders, Red Army. Check well the system of fire and the arrangement of anti-tank means. You'll be fighting with the battalion now. So act." Back in the dugout, I heard the report of the battalion adjutant Junior Lieutenant Akatiev on the numerical composition, armament, considered the scheme of defence. "In the companies, Comrade Combat," reported the one, "with the incoming replenishment of 63 people. In the former yours, 68. And how many anti-tank means in total? 4 Magpies and 18 anti-tank rifles, 3 anti-tank guns in the 1st and 3rd companies, and 3 with the reserve platoon of the battalion. It's on the edge of the forest, by the highway, behind your former company. And it has, as you know, 9 RPRs. Well, that's quite a lot. And if the tanks that Sedic was talking about also come, we can meet the fascists with a good fire." By evening, I went around the whole area of the battalion's defence. I checked the system of fire, engineering equipment of the terrain, knowledge of the tasks of unit commanders, interaction between them, the system of barriers in front of the front line. Yes, people have done a lot, but more was needed. I was especially concerned about the lack of continuous lines of trenches and communication lines, and the firing positions were dug only for squads and group weapons, and not everywhere full profile. On the front edge can move only bent, and in such conditions no covert manoeuvring units in the course of battle is out of the question. Not everywhere organised a continuous system of fire, especially at the junctions of companies and platoons. There is no second echelon in the battalion. In the reserve is only one, and that is one semblance of a rifle platoon. Not enough, very little. And another thing. If the second company dug on the flanks of the communication passages and prepared in them positions for branches, so that in the event of a breakthrough of the enemy defence could fight and surrounded, the other companies did not think about it. Moreover, the positions of departments on the front line in the 1st and 3rd companies are not connected to the trench at all. It is necessary to take urgent measures. Gathered company commanders showed them on the ground where and what to dig trenches and passages to equip firing positions. And with what forces? Junior Lieutenant Jelinski couldn't stand it. First of all, to work at night, I answered. At this time, the duty on the front line to carry only the calculations of machine guns and hand machine guns and a rifle squad from the company. Secondly, everyone to work. The order of work for the next days will be specified depending on the situation. Returning late in the evening to the battalion control, I saw, sitting in my dugout, political officer Ivanov. "Hello, Mikhail Grigorievich," he said, standing up. "Here we are together again. What are you looking at, not happy? As you can see, I got the appointment today. So, Ivan Ivanovich, you'll be our battalion commissar? That's great. How are you doing? What have you seen during the day?" Switching to a businesslike tone, the commissar asked. I took the scheme of the battalion's defence and, showing it, told him what, in my opinion, its strengths and weaknesses are at present. With a red pencil, I drew my solution for improvement. "Tonight we will begin the engineering work," I said in conclusion. "How much time is needed to open a company defence area?" asked interested Commissar. "According to my calculations, to work at night we will be able to attract from the battalion 110 to 112 people. So, we need 2 or 3 nights to dig the main positions and the same amount to connect them with a trench. In addition, it will take a couple more nights to conduct a message from the defence of the 2nd Company in the rear to the new stronghold." "Yes, it's a good idea," Ivanov nodded his head. "Only have time to complete all this before the enemy offensive. If we even do half of the planned, it will be good." "Right. Well, I'll go to the 1st Company," said Ivan Ivanovich. "I want to see what and how there, get acquainted with people. And I'll wait for the 2nd Company in the new neighbourhood. I want people to understand my decision correctly." The commissar and I left the dugout together. It's still drizzling cold rain. It's dark. One after another German rockets are taking off into the sky. In their false light, enemy machine guns comb the neutral strip with fire. Hitlerites do it for a reason. Last night our scouts captured several prisoners. And on the contrary, all attempts of fascists to drag away from our defence at least one tongue have no success. Now they are nervous. At the edge of the forest, near the highway, we parted with Ivan Ivanovich. A few minutes later I heard the stomping of feet and muffled talking. People were walking along the ditch. Not reaching the corner of the forest edge, they stopped. By the voice giving commands, I recognized Junior Lieutenant Jelinski. I came up and greeted the men, and I asked Jelinski, "Well, have you calmed down? Are you getting up to speed?" Little by little. Even in the morning, when I announced to Jelinski about his appointment as company commander, he took it somehow reluctantly. "Maybe someone else?" tried to refuse the junior lieutenant, but I insisted on my own, and not without reason. Jeliński served in the company for about 2 years. Modest and shy, for some reason he always shunned his superiors. Therefore, in his 25 years, and was considered the most ordinary platoon, which, they say, still need to acquire commanding qualities. The battles showed that these qualities Jeliński already has. His platoon fought steadfastly. The junior lieutenant himself showed courage, clarity of thought, and resourcefulness. There was no doubt that he could cope with the company, and now he commands it. From hour to hour more and more courageous, more confident. Nothing will enter, as they say, in the taste. Soon came to work, allocated to work teams and from other companies, as well as artillerymen, patererovci. All in all, there were 112 people. Having arranged the personnel to workplaces, we, together with Jeliński, went to the left flank of the defence area. Not reaching the highway, we suddenly heard strong Russian words. And then the same voice said, "Have they decided to dig up the whole Moscow region? That's my boss's. Does he think that if we dig trenches, we'll stop the Krauts with them? Like hell we will. We need more guns and tanks here then." And another thing. If the second company dug on the flanks of the communication passages and prepared in them positions for branches, so that in the event of a breakthrough of the enemy defence could fight and surrounded, the other companies did not think about it. Moreover, the positions of departments on the front line in the first and third companies are not connected to the trench at all. It is necessary to take urgent measures. Gathered company commanders showed them on the ground where and what to dig trenches and passages, to equip firing positions. And with what forces? Junior Lieutenant Jeliński couldn't stand it. "First of all, to work at night," I answered. "At this time the duty on the front line to carry only the calculations of machine guns and hand machine guns and a rifle squad from the company. Secondly, everyone to work. The order of work for the next days will be specified depending on the situation." Returning late in the evening to the battalion control, I saw, sitting in my dugout, political officer Ivanov. "Hello, Mikhail Grigorievich," he said, standing up. "Here we are together again. What are you looking at, not happy? As you can see, I got the appointment today. So, Ivan Ivanovich, you'll be our battalion commissar? That's great. How are you doing? What have you seen during the day?" Switching to a businesslike tone, the commissar asked. I took the scheme of the battalion's defence and, showing it, told him what, in my opinion, its strengths and weaknesses are at present. With a red pencil I drew my solution for improvement. "Tonight we will begin the engineering work," I said in conclusion. "How much time is needed to open a company defence area?" asked interested Commissar. "According to my calculations, to work at night we will be able to attract from the battalion 110 to 112 people. So, we need 2 or 3 nights to dig the main positions and the same amount to connect them with a trench. In addition, it will take a couple more nights to conduct a message from the defence of the second company in the rear to the new stronghold." "Yes, it's a good idea," Ivanov nodded his head. "Only have time to complete all this before the enemy offensive. If we even do half of the planned, it will be good." "Right. Well, I'll go to the first company," said Ivan Ivanovich. "I want to see what and how there, get acquainted with people. And I'll wait for the second company in the new neighbourhood. I want people to understand my decision correctly." The commissar and I left the dugout together. It's still drizzling cold rain. It's dark. One after another German rockets are taking off into the sky. In their false light, enemy machine guns comb the neutral strip with fire. Hitlerites do it for a reason. Last night our scouts captured several prisoners. And on the contrary, all attempts of fascists to drag away from our defence at least one tongue have no success. Now they are nervous. At the edge of the forest, near the highway, we parted with Ivan Ivanovich. A few minutes later I heard the stomping of feet and muffled talking. People were walking along the ditch. Not reaching the corner of the forest edge, they stopped. By the voice giving commands, I recognized Junior Lieutenant Jelinski. I came up and greeted the men, and I asked Jelinski, "Well, have you calmed down? Are you getting up to speed?" Little by little. Even in the morning, when I announced to Jelinski about his appointment as company commander, he took it somehow reluctantly. Maybe someone else? Tried to refuse the junior lieutenant. But I insisted on my own, and not without reason. Jelinski served in the company for about 2 years. Modest and shy, for some reason he always shunned his superiors. Therefore, in his 25 years and was considered the most ordinary platoon, which, they say, still need to acquire commanding qualities. The battles showed that these qualities Jelinski already has. His platoon fought steadfastly. The junior lieutenant himself showed courage, clarity of thought and resourcefulness. There was no doubt that he could cope with the company, and now he commands it. From hour to hour more and more courageous, more confident. Nothing will enter, as they say, in the taste. Soon came to work, allocated to work teams and from other companies, as well as artillerymen, patererovci. All in all, there were 112 people. Having arranged the personnel to workplaces, we, together with Jelinski, went to the left flank of the defence area. Not reaching the highway, we suddenly heard strong Russian words. And then the same voice said, "Have they decided to dig up the whole Moscow region? That's my boss's. Does he think that if we dig trenches, we'll stop the Krauts with them? Like hell we will. We need more guns and tanks here then." We approached the men who were talking. There were 2 of them. One Red Army soldier was silently digging the ground with a big sapper shovel, and the other, bending low, was cleaning up the bottom of the trench with a small shovel. He was the one who conducted such conversations. "Who are you?" I asked, coming close to the workers. "Our own. Who else, Comrade Combat?" Reluctantly answered the one who was nagging trench work. "What's the last name? How long have you been in the company?" "Gushchin. Red Army man." "Gushchin," corrected the fighter. "It's the 3rd day in the company." "Where did you come from?" "From the transit centre." "Were you surrounded?" "We were surrounded. Now," he answered angrily. "Where did you get caught?" "Last time near Maloyaroslavl. And I retreated as far as Mogilev." The soldier said so. "Near Maloyaroslavl." I corrected him. "Under Maloyaroslavets." And I continued, "So what? Didn't you dig trenches there?" "Why, we did." The fascist avoided them. He'd poke in, sometimes he'd run into fire, and then he'd go back. So when you had trenches, he didn't come at you. And where there were no trenches, or they were just poorly dug, he came and went around, took you in a ring, right? "It appears so," Gushchin muttered. "Bad talk. Red Army soldier?" "Gushchin," I raised my voice. Instead of telling people the truth about how the fascists, running into a prepared defence, were repulsed and rolled back, and then looked for loopholes, places where there was no defence or it was poorly prepared, and there, advancing, surrounded those who defended well, you grumble and demagnetize people. I hope that the soldiers will still hear this truth from you, who has already fought, and will understand that with a well-prepared defence it is easier to beat the enemy, that the trenches will protect them from shrapnel and from bullets and even from enemy tanks. What am I saying, Comrade Combat? It's just for the sake of argument. Here's what, Gushchin. On your smoke break you'll tell your platoon about everything you told me. On the second smoke break, to the other platoon, to everyone else. "And what about my 5 meters?" asked Gushchin. "What 5 meters?" "Our platoon commander, Comrade Combat, ordered me and Kozlov overnight to dig 5 meters of trench. Comrade Jelinski," I turned to the company commander, "let Gushchin for the night to go around the company and those units that arrived here and tell everyone what we talked about, and reduce his ration." "Hey, what a fool I am!" I heard Gushchin's words as I was leaving. "Combat, of course, right? To dig the land must be, without a trench, you're like a pimple in one place. 3 days passed unnoticed during the work. Hitlerites all this time behaved relatively calmly. Through binoculars it was visible that they were also digging trenches, but their snipers were constantly hunting for our men. Yes, artillery from shooting now and then went to massive raids on the front edge, the depth of our defences. Meanwhile, engineering work in the battalion was not moving as fast as we would have liked. We lacked large sapper shovels, saws, axes. We had to give 1 shovel for 2 or even 3 men. We dug in shifts. 5 metres for 2 men, the norm, which was established in the 2nd Company, no one, of course, did not fulfil. We dug, at most, 3.5, 4 metres of trench. In addition, immediately after the first night of work over the defence of the battalion appeared Frame, photographing already dug sections of trenches. Similar things were repeated during the following days. Probably, the course of engineering works seriously worried the enemy command if its aviation so diligently conducted reconnaissance of our defences. And what would follow? It is known. We had to pray for only one thing, that the enemy would slow down with artillery and air raids at least a couple more days and nights. On the back slopes of one of the heights, the company of 82mm mortars assigned to me equipped firing positions. This unit was commanded by Junior Lieutenant G.A. Shapovalov, a graduate of the Kemerovo Infantry School. His observation post was 400 metres away from mine, which of course could make it difficult for me to control the fire of these mortars. "Wouldn't it be better for you to equip your observation post near mine?" I suggested to Shapovalov at the first acquaintance. He cheerfully answered that he didn't see any need in it. Besides, they had been taught in the school to position themselves in this way. "Good. Let's leave this conversation for now," I said uncertainly. "I'll visit you one day, then we'll see." The next morning I really appeared in the mortar company. Shapovalov was not at the observation post for some reason. The scouts were asleep. I had to wake them up. When I asked them where their company commander was, they answered with silence. "Call the company commander, junior sergeant." "Timing," I ordered the senior scout, looking at the clock. "By the way, who has the fire card?" The company commander. A few more minutes passed. Shapovalov was not there. What carelessness! Boiled at the heart of anger. From day to day is expected to attack the Nazis, and Shapovalov, that's why he equipped his NP here, so that therefore away from the eyes of his superiors. But nothing. Now we'll scold you, junior lieutenant. 15 minutes later, the company commander and the political officer came running. Both of them were asleep. Without saying a word, I went down into the open slot where there was a stereo tube, asked, "Where is your place, Junior Lieutenant Shapovalov? From where you will control the fire of the company?" "From here." He pointed to the stereo tube. I went up to it, nestled into the eyepieces. The terrain in front of the front edge of our battalion's defence was almost invisible, the junction with the 2nd Battalion too. "What will you see from here?" I asked the junior lieutenant, raising my voice. "Is this how they taught you to choose a position?" Shapovalov stood silently with his head down. "Show me the scheme of lights." Shapovalov was silent again. "Do you have a scheme of lights?" I asked him again. "No, Comrade Combat." "Who gave you the task?" "The former commander." "And what? He didn't tell you about all this?" "He did." "Give the command." "Company, to battle." I commanded Shapovalov. "Ready to report? Take your places." He gave the command. Scouts and telephonists took their places. "Company, to battle," was followed by a second command. But about the readiness, there was no report about it, neither in 5 minutes nor in 10. Only after a quarter of an hour, the firing positions finally responded. 15 minutes. This state of affairs with combat readiness in the mortar company angered me to the core. How could you come to such a life, Junior Lieutenant Shapovalov? And you, political officer, why are you in the company? Shut up! In short, you both deserve to be removed from your posts and put on trial. I'll report it to the regiment commander and commissar today." Hearing the last words, Shapovalov and political officer blushed thickly. "We are guilty, Comrade Combat," the first Politruk said. "Honestly, we'll fix the matter. And you, Shapovalov, what do you say?" "I'm sorry, Comrade Combat, shuffling from foot to foot," said the one. "I'm a gunner. I finished infantry school, and of course I don't know mortar business very well." "Now," I thought, "you will no longer show your independence. A boy, a week on the front, and there you go. What I want, I do what I want. No, Junior Lieutenant, war doesn't forgive such things. Even though it's hard for you now and you're ashamed, but you're learning. Later on, you'll teach others to be smart and wise." Out loud he ordered, "Put the observation post next to mine by tomorrow morning. I'll show you the place." The same night to equip the main positions on the eastern slopes of the height, to the right of the highway. The next night you'll open the reserve ones over there, to the left of the highway. Connect them with a line of communication. Is that clear? "Yes, Comrade Combat. It will be done." By the tone felt, yes, Shapovalov will now do everything as it should. After all, he has already received a visual lesson.